Welcome back to the Christian Century YouTube channel. I'm John today, joined by one of our online columnists and friend of this channel, Mac Loftin, to talk about the latest piece, the title of which really holds nothing back. The war with Iran is the crowning stupidity of our stupid age. So we're going to talk about the war that is still going on, or maybe not. Who knows what you can believe anymore, but we're going to talk about this war. Um, Before we dive into that, Mac, hello, how are you doing? For those out there who maybe are new to the channel, can you tell us who you are?
Yeah, so I'm Mac. I completed my PhD in theology a couple of years ago now at this point, end of 2024. And since then have been, an online columnist here at the Century and doing some odd teaching in the Boston area. And always happy to be here on the YouTube channel.
Thanks, Mac. Anyone out there, feel free if you like this video, please like the video with the like button and subscribe to the channel. All right.
Yeah, and I should plug my book. I have a book. I forgot to do that. The book that came out at the end of last year out of Orbis Books called In the Twilight of the Christian West. Please go purchase that. I would really appreciate that.
And if you'd like to do that, the link is in the video description below to go order that book. So like this video, subscribe to our channel, buy Mac's book. Okay, that stuff's out of the way. And this war with Iran. So there's
Yeah.
plenty of reasons that we could think of this as stupid in a Bonhoeffer sense, which we will get to in a minute. One of the reasons you point out is like, what is the reason we got into this war? There's claims of nuclear programs, though that was allegedly demolished like last year. Well, we want to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, but that strait was only ever closed because we started this war. I just wonder, have you heard in the time since you've written this essay, have you heard any good reasons why we started this war, or do you have anything more to say about the meaninglessness of this war?
Yeah, I mean, no, really, which is really unexpected, I think. I think at this point, this is early May, so went on for all of March, all of April. So we're into the third month of this war, and I really would have thought at this point, not necessarily that the people prosecuting the war would have been able to give a coherent reason, but that like smart analysts and observers would have been able to come up with some reason for it, even if it's not the reason that the people carrying out the war are explicitly giving. But it seems to be completely without reason or justification. Like even some of the really smart analysts and news channels that I've been keeping up with for analysis of this war are just at a loss to say anything about why this is happening. What possible interest for the United States is there in doing this? Um, and so it just seems that this, I was compelled to write this column about stupidity just because this war seems so, I use the phrase hostile to thought in the column, but just like impossible to think about, impossible to understand in the sense of like the intellect kind of thinking through an object of analysis. It's like a when you try to think about, okay, what is this war? Why is it happening? It's like a I remember once as a kid, we played this game where we covered a watermelon in Vaseline, and you try and get it out of the pool, and it's impossible because it just like slips, and you try to hold it under, and it pops up, and like that image has kept coming into mind of like when my mind is trying to like get some sort of grip on like, well, what is this? What is happening? It just is completely like thought phobic. It just slips out of comprehension every time you try and think about it. And so I thought that was an interesting feature of this war, is this kind of impossibility to think about it. An impossibility to think about it that the people carrying out the war seem to have embraced with their refusal to justify it. This is not like the Iraq War, which, a great deal of effort was used to make a case for it. The case was all lies, but there was an effort to persuade people that this was a reasonable thing to do. And that seems to not be a priority for anyone carrying out this war. Just nobody cares to really sit down and make a case for it, which is interesting. But what I was really compelled well, the reason why I was really compelled to write this column was that I think there's a risk because this war is so manifestly stupid and so hostile to thought and reason, and because the people carrying out this war are so proudly stupid and unthinking and refuse to present it to people as something that could be thought through. There's this temptation to think of this war as being unique in that respect. To say, okay, well, this war is a stupid war in contrast to some imagined not stupid war. That this one is that what sets this war apart is its stupidity. And so I really wanted to push back on that impulse that I was feeling a little bit in myself and I was seeing in some other people of like, no, this the fact that this war is so stupid is just a particularly vivid or undeniable feature of all war. The war itself is something hostile to thought, is something fundamentally and essentially stupid. And so this is like, this war is kind of like a particularly freakish or grotesque instance of this broader thing that lets you see a feature that you might not otherwise see in other wars, but it's not unique in that respect. They're all stupid. They all have this fundamental irrationality about them.
Yeah. Yeah, this one is so obviously stupid that it lays bare the stupidity of all the other wars that we might not see as easily. I
Right. And the risk is that you think, well, this one's so obviously stupid, so other ones must not be.
Right. And not to spend too much longer on the uniquely obviousness of the stupidity of this one, but I was struck in your essay. One of the things from Bonhoeffer you drew from was this description of a stupid person, where
Yeah.
he says it feels like you're engaging not with a person, but with just slogans and catchwords. And truly, has there ever, I mean, I wonder if there's ever been a better description of Pete Hegseth than that paragraph, which you point out
Yeah.
in your essay.
Yeah.
I wondered if you would just wanted to share anything else in terms of insights from Bonhoeffer that you've been processing as you've thought about this war or war stupidity in general.
Yeah. I mean, so Bonhoeffer really puts this understanding of stupidity really clearly that stupidity for him is a sociological problem and not a problem of, not an individual problem and not a problem of like intellect. Like when he's talking about stupidity or a stupid person, he is very clear that this has nothing to do with like the computing power of a brain. This has nothing to do with education level. This has nothing to do with how quick someone's wits are. That this is about a refusal to think. That stupidity for him is something done to people. It's a condition that people are put into. Someone is made stupid. It's not like an essential feature of someone. The kind of like that tends to be often the way that we use the word today as kind of an insult or demeaning someone by referring to how much education they have or kind of how quickly they can think. And that's not what Bonhoeffer is talking about at all. He's talking about this kind of being stupefied is maybe another way to think about it in the face of power and violence. And so I brought in Bonhoeffer into the piece because he says all of this so clearly and directly. But really, as I was writing through this, I was thinking a lot of Hannah Arendt, who I worked in a reference to at the end to kind of signal how indebted the column is to her thinking. Um, but like her analysis of Eichmann is very similar to Bonhoeffer's description of the stupid person, of someone who refuses to think, someone who thinks only in terms of slogans or catchphrases. And so this essay of hers, that which is kind of after her Eichmann book, she's looking back and reflecting on it, that I cite at the end of the column, is her really thinking through, okay, well, what is the process of thinking? You know, what is it that thinking does? And one thing that is really interesting about her analysis of thinking is that she's like, and I kind of make a reference to this at the start of the essay, but like the phrase is that we stop and think. You know, you stop and think. There's something about thinking that is kind of in friction with our everyday activity, that there's some sense in which you kind of have to hold off on, or at least like take some sort of distance from whatever it is that you're doing, to think about it. And so for her, the problem, she doesn't use the term stupidity. That's another reason why I drew in Bonhoeffer. She wants to separate stupidity from what she's talking about. But for her, the unthinking person is the person who gets so caught up in what they're doing that they're unable to kind of take this critical distance. And so I think that for her, is part of the strategy of fascist or authoritarian politics, is that it whips you up into this constant obedience, and the rules are always changing. So you're always having to like, oh, now I need to do this. We were doing it this way, and now we have to do it this way. That you're kind of in this like this frenzied pace of obedience and anticipatory obedience, that you're not able to really take a step and be like, well, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Are there other ways to be doing things that we should be doing instead? How would I evaluate different possible ways of doing things? That those are all thought process that you have to, even if you don't have to literally stop what you're doing to do that, there has to be some kind of like distance from yourself and what you're doing. And like to get back to Hegseth, like he seems like someone who is really allergic to taking that kind of thoughtful distance between himself and what he's doing. I mean, even in the language that he uses, it's all this like such slogans, and the slogans are always about speed and action, the unity of purpose, maximum lethality, war fighters, engaging in high kinetic intensity, whatever the hell he's talking about. Like his very language is this kind of like, don't think, just do, 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 obey, 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 kill, move, act. And so I think both of them, if this was a longer column, I think I probably would have put Bonhoeffer and Arendt in conversation a little bit more. But both of them are really thinking through this kind of this link between thinking and a kind of disruption of action. That there's a way that thinking really like throws a wrench in the gears and kind of makes you step back a little bit, which is why I also allude to prayer as a possible practice that can maybe kind of, it is hard to be too, you know, in the motions of things and pray at the same time. You kind of like prayer, kind of you have to take this sort of pause, this little bit of distance from whatever it is you're doing. So I think it is a possible resource for cultivating a real kind of thoughtfulness.
Thanks. You made me think of that one time in the Oval Office when Hegseth's catchphrases and slogans just were all rhyming, and it was like it's all
Right. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
almost like poetry, but how can poetry be in service of this just like thoughtless action and violence?
Yeah.
Just a weird moment, but
Because it was rhyme, it's the most thoughtless kind of poetry, like things that just rhyme.
it just
It's
happened
like
to
there's
rhyme,
not
right?
any, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Okay, the last thing I wanted to ask you about, between Bonhoeffer and Arendt in this essay, there's a long section where you engage with War and Peace by Tolstoy. And I will just admit to the world, I have not read War and Peace, so I learned a
It's
lot.
good. It is much more readable than I thought it was. I read it for the first time this past year with a group of people, and it is. Really good. I recommend if anyone has been holding off on it because you think it's long and boring, it is long. It's not boring. It's very readable. The party stuff is all juicy. It's great.
Love it. Okay, I will add it to my list. But I was just going to ask you if there's any insight from reading that book that either that was in this essay or not that you just wanted to kind of expand on a little bit or tell us about.
Yeah, I touch on it a little bit, but I think so. My very first column here at the Century was about the concept of the demonic, and demons. The language of demons in the Bible is giving us a way to think about forces that kind of forces or institutions in the world that seem to live of their own and kind of act on their own in such a way that the people who serve them are given the trappings of power and authority and wealth, but only to the extent that they give up their own autonomy, their own moral judgment, their own reasoning. That the language of demons in the Bible, which might seem kind of exotic or outdated or bizarre, is actually a very acute way of understanding exactly that dynamic of how people in that initial column I talked about war as being one of these forces where, if you think of um, someone at the top of a military hierarchy as oh this appears to be someone who has a great deal of power. Everywhere they go, everybody salutes them. They have all these medals on their chests. They go to these big functions where other powerful people gather. But to be to kind of rise to the top of the war hierarchy involves kind of evacuating yourself of critical reflection on war and violence. It involves kind of giving up your moral autonomy, your freedom to make moral judgments, all those things. And so like it's kind of the more appearances of power you have is actually a signal of greater subservience, and that the language of the demonic in the Bible is a really a precise diagnosis of all of that. Um, and so I wrote that before I read War and Peace, and then reading it over this past year really drove home to me. Like I think Tolstoy is thinking through something similar. It's something that really appears in the book that I touch on a little bit in this column. But his analysis of Napoleon and Tsar Alexander are as like these are the people who seem to be the two people, especially Napoleon seems to be the person who is moving the world. That like, if you kind of just ask a person on the street, who is the individual person who has been, the most powerful person in the world, or who is the single individual person who has most influenced human history? Like probably people would say Napoleon. Like he kind of is who we think of as being the most powerful person, the person who most like spins the world with his own hands. And Tolstoy, like a major theme in War and Peace is that Napoleon is the stupidest person ever, and also the most powerless person. And Tolstoy has this really specific analysis of military power, social power, particularly the kind of power that Napoleon embodies as actually being the kind of the higher up you are on the social hierarchy for Tolstoy, like the less powerful you actually are, the less real power you have. And so he says, like, Napoleon seems to be the guy who he gives a command and everybody scrambles to obey it. Millions of people do what he says. He says, let's invade Russia, and millions of people die in this invasion of Russia. But Tolstoy's like, but the people who seem to be carrying out Napoleon's orders are doing those actions because of a million different causes are all lining up. And so each individual person is doing what they're doing because of a million causes. You have a million people with a million different causes that all have to line up in order for Napoleon's command to seem to be obeyed. But that means at that point, all of those causes have happened. So that thing that Tolstoy or that Napoleon seems to be ordering is going to happen whether or not he orders it at all. And so he's actually the person who has the least influence over his own actions and over the actions of others. Like he is the one who is completely conditioned by all of these other forces in the world, but he's the one who thinks of himself as being in charge. And so like that's where the Tolstoy doesn't I don't think he uses the language of stupidity a little bit. Um, but like what I think is particularly interesting about his reading of Napoleon is like Napoleon is the one who most misunderstands his own place in the world. That like the conscript who is, picked up off the farm and forced to go fight in Napoleon's stupid war, at least knows, okay, I'm not choosing to do this. I'm doing this because I have to do this. I'm doing this because, there are these other causes in my life that are compelling this action from me. Whereas Napoleon is the one who thinks that he's completely uncompelled. He thinks that he's the freest. And so like Tolstoy has this analysis where like the further up you go on the military or social hierarchy, the less able you are to actually accurately see the relationship between your own thoughts and your own actions. Um, and so I mean it's a great book. I feel like everybody thinks in terms of the costumes, they do the dances or whatever, but it's the analysis of Napoleon that I think is the most compelling part and is the part that seems to be really the most true today. That like if you think of the people in the world who seem to be the most powerful, the people in our world who seem to be the ones who give the commands that move the world, like I think a close analysis of these people would show that these are not people who are just willing something to happen and then it happens out of their own, freedom and their own power or something. That these are actually the most constrained people of all and the most deluded about the relationship between their own commands and actions in the world around them. So I think I got a little bit of that in the column. I think a longer version would have really gotten more into Tolstoy's understanding of cause and effect in history. Yeah, he says towards the end of the book that the whole book is intended to be a refutation of free will. He's like people don't really have free will, like people are just compelled by these forces. And so if you're at the bottom of the social hierarchy, you don't have free will. So at least you have a little bit of insight into that. But if you're Napoleon, you think you're the freest person ever. A longer version would have got a little bit more into that. But I think, yeah, that particular analysis of like the unfreedom that power brings, I think is really important.
Wow. Yeah, a lot of that is quite reminiscent of that first column you wrote about demons and I think Stringfellow's theology.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so we'll throw that link in the video description below as well. So anyone out there, read the demon column. Uh, read this essay if you haven't read it. Order Mac's book. Thank you so much for chatting today, Mac.
Yeah, thank you. Always fun.